The message you are about to hear is not loud, but it is powerful. It is not angry, but it carries weight. And if somehow this message found its way to you at this exact moment, then something deeper than coincidence is happening. Because this message is about a moment, a turning point, the silent second when someone who once waited for you stops waiting. You may not have noticed it yet, but it has already begun. Somewhere, someone who once watched the screen hoping to see your name has slowly started putting the phone down. Someone who once reread your messages late at night has started closing those conversations. Someone who once believed that if they just stayed patient a little longer, you would finally understand how much they cared. But patience is not infinite. And silence can slowly teach the heart a very painful lesson. You see, when people hear the word sorry, they think it fixes everything. They believe one word can rewind time, erase nights of confusion, and heal days of being ignored. But there is something many people never realize until it is too late. A sorry that comes after someone has already felt invisible does not land the same way. Because before the apology, there were moments. Moments when someone sent a message, and watched the typing bubble that never appeared. Moments when someone waited for a reply, telling themselves you were probably just busy. Moments when someone tried again, and again. And again, hoping this time you would notice. And every time silence answered them, a small piece of their hope quietly disappeared. Not in anger. Not in drama. Just, quietly. Most people think the moment someone leaves is the moment they say goodbye. But the truth is far more complicated. People don't leave all at once. They leave in small emotional steps. First, they stop explaining how they feel. Then they stop expecting replies. Then they stop checking their phone. Then they stop believing things will change. And finally, they stop trying. That final step is the quietest one. Because when someone truly stops trying, they stop announcing it. And that is the moment when everything shifts. You see, there was a time when your attention meant everything to them. Your messages could change their whole mood. A simple, "How are you?" could brighten their day. A short conversation could stay in their mind for hours. But something started happening. You began to respond less. Your replies became shorter. Your presence became occasional. And at first, they didn't blame you. They defended you. They told themselves you were busy. They told themselves life gets complicated. They told themselves not to overthink. But the heart notices patterns. And slowly, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Days passed. Then weeks. Conversations that once felt alive began to feel one-sided. And still, they stayed. That's the part people rarely see. They stayed longer than anyone would know. They waited through confusion. They waited through doubt. They waited through silence. Because they believed something about you was real. Something about you mattered to them. But here is the truth that many people discover too late. Being ignored does something very strange to the human heart. At first, it hurts. Then it confuses. Then it slowly transforms into something else. It becomes distance. And distance, once it grows, is very hard to reverse. Because the person who once tried so hard to reach you, begins learning how to live without reaching for you at all. At first, that idea seems impossible. They can't imagine not caring. They can't imagine not checking for your name. But the heart is incredibly adaptive. It learns. It adjusts. And eventually, it protects itself. One day they wake up and realize something surprising. They didn't check their phone this morning. They didn't reread old messages last night. They didn't wait for you today. And that realization feels strange, but also peaceful. Because the waiting, the hoping, the wondering, had quietly drained them for a long time. Now imagine something even more unexpected. What if one day, you finally reach out? What if you send a message? What if you say, sorry? What if you explain that life was complicated, that you didn't mean to disappear, that things were just difficult? And maybe every word you say is honest. Maybe you truly regret the silence. But the response you receive is not the one you expected. Because the person who once waited for your attention has already crossed an invisible emotional bridge. On the other side of that bridge, things feel different. Not colder. Not cruel. Just calm. They no longer feel the urgent pull to reply instantly. They no longer feel the rush of excitement when your name appears. They no longer feel the fear of losing the connection. And that change can be shocking. Because for so long, you believed they would always be there. Always patient. Always understanding. Always forgiving. But people are not endless wells of patience. Even the most loyal hearts eventually learn the value of protecting themselves. And when that lesson arrives, it changes everything. That is why the words in the title carry a deeper meaning than they first appear. Sorry, you ignored me. Now I will ignore you. It does not mean revenge. It does not mean bitterness. It means something quieter, and far more powerful. It means someone finally stopped chasing the attention that was never freely given. It means someone realized their presence deserved to be noticed, not begged for. And when that realization settles into the heart, the transformation begins. Suddenly, the silence that once hurt them becomes something they can live with. The absence that once felt unbearable becomes normal. And the person they once centered their emotions around becomes just another memory. But here is the twist that almost nobody expects. When someone truly stops chasing, that is often the exact moment the other person finally looks back. Human nature has a strange way of noticing absence more than presence. When someone always waits for you, you assume they always will. But when they stop, the quiet can feel surprisingly loud. The unread message. The delayed reply. The calm distance. All of it begins to send a message without words. And suddenly you start wondering something that never crossed your mind before. What changed? But the truth is, nothing changed overnight. The change happened slowly, while you were busy not noticing. While you were distracted. While you believed time would always wait for you. But time never waits. And neither do hearts. Right now, somewhere in the world, thousands of people are experiencing this exact moment. The moment they finally stop waiting. The moment they finally stop explaining. The moment they quietly step back from someone who never realized how much their attention meant. And if this message found you today, there are only two possibilities. Either you are the person who waited, and finally found the strength to let go. Or you are the person who is only now realizing what silence can cost. Both roles carry lessons. But only one of them still has time to change the story. Because the truth is, most connections in life don't end with explosions. They end with fading signals. Unanswered messages. Unspoken feelings. And one quiet realization. I mattered more than they noticed. But this story, the one unfolding right now, is not finished yet. Because in the next moments, something will be revealed that almost nobody talks about. A hidden psychological shift that happens when someone who was ignored, finally stops caring. And once you understand it, you will never look at silence the same way again. What happens next might surprise you. Because the moment someone decides to stop waiting for you, that is the exact moment their life begins moving in a direction you can no longer control. And that direction is where the real transformation begins. Something unusual begins to happen the moment a person stops waiting. At first, it is so subtle that even they do not recognize it. For weeks, maybe months, their world had revolved around a single question. Why am I being ignored? That question had followed them everywhere. It appeared when they woke up in the morning. It appeared when they checked their phone. It appeared late at night when the room was quiet and the mind refused to rest. The question slowly became heavier than the silence itself. Because the human mind dislikes unanswered emotions. It searches for reasons. It builds theories. It replays conversations again and again. Did I say something wrong? Did I expect too much? Did they lose interest? And the longer those questions remain unanswered, the deeper they echo inside the heart. But then one day, something shifts. It does not happen dramatically. There is no announcement. No sudden speech. Just a quiet decision that forms in the background of their thoughts. What if I stop asking why? That question becomes the beginning of freedom. Because once the mind stops chasing explanations, it starts noticing something unexpected. Peace. Yes, peace. The same silence that once felt unbearable, suddenly feels calmer. The same empty notification screen, no longer controls their mood. And the same person who once felt like the center of their emotional universe, slowly begins losing that power. This is the stage most people never notice. Because when someone stops chasing you, they rarely announce it. They simply redirect their energy. Energy that once went toward waiting, begins flowing somewhere else. Toward personal growth. Toward new conversations. Toward friendships that actually respond. toward moments that feel alive instead of confusing. And slowly, their world expands again. But here is the part that surprises many people. When someone stops waiting for you, they don't just forget you. They start seeing the past more clearly. All the moments they once ignored suddenly come into focus. They remember the times they excused your silence. The times they defended your absence. The times they convinced themselves everything was normal. But now, with emotional distance, the picture looks different. They realize they were giving effort where effort was not returned. They realize they were protecting a connection that only one person was truly maintaining. And this realization does not create anger. It creates clarity. Clarity is powerful. Because clarity replaces hope with understanding. Hope says, maybe things will change. Clarity says, now I understand why they didn't. And once clarity arrives, the emotional chapter begins to close. Not with resentment. Not with revenge. But with acceptance. And acceptance is quiet. You will not hear it. You will not see dramatic signs. But you will notice something if you pay attention closely. The person who once replied instantly, now replies hours later. The person who once started every conversation, now rarely begins one. The person who once explained their feelings, now keeps them private. It is not punishment. It is emotional balance being restored. Because when someone has spent too long feeling invisible, the heart eventually learns to protect its own value. Imagine someone standing outside a door for hours, knocking gently. At first, they believe the person inside simply hasn't heard them. So they knock again. And again. And again. Eventually, the truth becomes clear. The door was never going to open. So they stop knocking. Not because they hate the person inside. But because they finally realize they deserve a door that opens willingly. And that realization changes how they move through life. Now imagine something else. One day, the person inside the door suddenly decides to open it. Maybe they were distracted. Maybe they were unsure. Maybe they didn't realize someone had been waiting outside. So they open the door and say, "Sorry." But when they look outside, the person who had been waiting is gone. Not far away. Not hiding. Just living somewhere else. That is the quiet consequence of being ignored for too long. The world does not stop for anyone. Hearts do not pause forever. And people who finally rediscover their own value rarely return to the same place where they felt unimportant. But there is another layer to this story that few people talk about. Something psychological. Something deeply human. When someone stops chasing your attention, your mind begins noticing their absence more than their presence. Before, their messages were expected. Their care was predictable. Their patience was guaranteed. And human nature often takes predictable things for granted. But once that predictability disappears, curiosity wakes up. You start noticing the silence. You start wondering why they are not reaching out. You start remembering the effort they used to make. And suddenly, a strange feeling begins to appear. Not regret exactly, but awareness. Awareness that someone who once valued your attention may have finally stopped waiting for it. That awareness can be uncomfortable, because it forces a question many people try to avoid. What did I lose without realizing it? The answer to that question is different for everyone. For some, it is the loss of someone who genuinely cared. For others, it is the loss of emotional safety. Because there are very few people in life who care consistently. Who check on you without needing a reason. Who stay patient even when communication becomes messy. Those people are rare. And sometimes, we only recognize their value after their silence begins to mirror our own. But this story is not about guilt. It is about understanding a simple but powerful truth. Attention is one of the most valuable emotional currencies in the world. Where someone chooses to place their attention, reveals what matters to them. And when someone repeatedly offers you their attention, they are offering something meaningful. Time. Energy. Emotion. When that offering is ignored long enough, it eventually stops being offered. And once it stops, it rarely returns in the same way. But something even more fascinating happens next. When someone truly stops seeking your attention, their life begins transforming in ways that surprise even them. They start discovering things about themselves that had been buried under emotional weighting. They rediscover confidence. They rediscover focus. They rediscover interests and passions that had quietly faded. And as they grow, the version of them that once waited by the phone slowly disappears. In its place stands someone stronger. Someone calmer. Someone who no longer needs constant validation to feel valued. That transformation is powerful. Because once someone reaches that stage, their emotional energy becomes selective. They no longer give unlimited attention to people who treat it casually. They give it to people who meet them halfway. People who listen. People who show up. People who understand that connection is not built by one person alone. It is built by mutual presence. Mutual effort. Mutual respect. And here is the most surprising twist of all. At first, they believe the person inside simply hasn't heard them. So they knock again. And again. And again. Eventually, the truth becomes clear. The door was never going to open. So they stop knocking. Not because they hate the person inside, but because they finally realize they deserve a door that opens willingly. And that realization changes how they move through life. Now imagine something else. One day, the person inside the door suddenly decides to open it. Maybe they were distracted. Maybe they were unsure. Maybe they didn't realize someone had been waiting outside. So they open the door and say, "Sorry." But when they look outside, the person who had been waiting is gone. Not far away. Not hiding. Just living somewhere else. That is the quiet consequence of being ignored for too long. The world does not stop for anyone. Hearts do not pause forever. And people who finally rediscover their own value rarely return to the same place where they felt unimportant. But there is another layer to this story that few people talk about. Something psychological. Something deeply human. When someone stops chasing your attention, your mind begins noticing their absence more than their presence. Before, their messages were expected. Their care was predictable. Their patience was guaranteed. And human nature often takes predictable things for granted. But once that predictability disappears, curiosity wakes up. You start noticing the silence. You start wondering why they are not reaching out. You start remembering the effort they used to make. And suddenly, a strange feeling begins to appear. Not regret exactly, but awareness. Awareness that someone who once valued your attention may have finally stopped waiting for it. That awareness can be uncomfortable, because it forces a question many people try to avoid. What did I lose without realizing it? The answer to that question is different for everyone. For some, it is the loss of someone who genuinely cared. For others, it is the loss of emotional safety. Because there are very few people in life who care consistently. Who check on you without needing a reason. Who stay patient even when communication becomes messy. Those people are rare. And sometimes, we only recognize their value after their silence begins to mirror our own. But this story is not about guilt. It is about understanding a simple but powerful truth. Attention is one of the most valuable emotional currencies in the world. Where someone chooses to place their attention, reveals what matters to them. And when someone repeatedly offers you their attention, they are offering something meaningful. Time. Energy. Emotion. When that offering is ignored long enough, it eventually stops being offered. And once it stops, it rarely returns in the same way. But something even more fascinating happens next. When someone truly stops seeking your attention, their life begins transforming in ways that surprise even them. They start discovering things about themselves that had been buried under emotional weighting. They rediscover confidence. They rediscover focus. They rediscover interests and passions that had quietly faded. And as they grow, the version of them that once waited by the phone slowly disappears. In its place stands someone stronger. Someone calmer. Someone who no longer needs constant validation to feel valued. That transformation is powerful. Because once someone reaches that stage, their emotional energy becomes selective. They no longer give unlimited attention to people who treat it casually. They give it to people who meet them halfway. People who listen. People who show up. People who understand that connection is not built by one person alone. It is built by mutual presence. Mutual effort. Mutual respect. And here is the most surprising twist of all. The person who once felt ignored, often becomes more attractive in every sense once they stop chasing. Not because they are trying to prove something, but because independence carries a quiet confidence. Confidence that does not beg. Confidence that does not chase. Confidence that simply exists. And when people see that change, they begin to look again. But by that time, the emotional landscape has already shifted. Because the person who once waited so patiently has learned something unforgettable. Their worth does not depend on someone else's attention. And once that lesson becomes part of someone's identity, their life begins moving forward in ways they never expected. New conversations. New opportunities. New connections that feel balanced instead of confusing. And suddenly, the past feels distant. Like a chapter that taught them something important, but no longer defines their future. But the story does not end there. Because in part 3, something even deeper will be revealed. A hidden emotional law that quietly shapes almost every human connection. A law that explains why people sometimes realize someone's value only after they stop trying. Once you understand that law, you will never look at silence, attention, or relationships the same way again. Because the real meaning behind the words, "Sorry, you ignored me. Now I will ignore you," is far more powerful than it first appears. There is a hidden emotional law that quietly governs almost every human connection. Most people never notice it, until they experience it. This law is simple, yet incredibly powerful. People value what they feel they might lose. Think about it carefully. When something feels guaranteed, the mind relaxes. When someone always answers, their replies feel normal. When someone always waits, their patience feels endless. But the moment that certainty disappears, something inside the human mind wakes up. Awareness. Suddenly the silence becomes noticeable. Suddenly the absence becomes meaningful. Suddenly the person who once seemed predictable becomes important in a way that wasn't recognized before. This is not cruelty. It is simply how human attention works. The mind is designed to notice change. And when someone who once gave you consistent care suddenly becomes distant, the mind starts asking questions. Why are they different now? Why aren't they reaching out? Why does it feel quieter than before? That quiet is powerful. Because silence carries messages that words often cannot. But here is something even more fascinating. When someone stops chasing your attention, they are not only changing your perception. They are changing their own identity. Before, their emotional world was built around one central focus. You. Your replies. Your presence. Your attention. Every small interaction carried meaning. A message from you could lift their mood. A delayed reply could make them wonder all day. Their emotions were connected to the rhythm of your responses. But once they stop waiting, the center of their emotional world begins to shift. Slowly, it moves away from you, and back toward themselves. This shift is quiet, but life-changing. Because when someone recenters their life around their own growth, their own peace, their own direction, something remarkable begins to happen. Their energy changes. This is the moment when many people finally understand something important. Consistency is rare. Genuine interest is rare. Someone who repeatedly chooses to give you their time, attention, and emotional presence, is offering something valuable. But human nature often recognizes value only after distance creates perspective. Distance reveals what familiarity hides. And once distance exists, the connection rarely returns to exactly what it once was. Not because people are unforgiving, but because emotional growth changes priorities. The person who once tolerated uncertainty learns to prefer clarity. The person who once chased conversations learns to appreciate balanced communication. The person who once overinvested emotionally learns to value mutual effort. These changes reshape the way they connect with others. They no longer feel the need to prove their importance. They no longer feel the urge to chase attention. They simply observe. They watch who shows up, who listens, who responds, who respects their presence. And the people who do those things naturally remain in their life. The people who don't slowly drift away. This is not revenge. This is evolution. Emotional maturity always moves toward balance. Toward relationships where effort flows both ways. Toward conversations where presence is mutual. Toward connections where neither person feels invisible. But there is one more twist to this story. Sometimes, after someone has fully stepped back, the other person finally decides to step forward. Maybe curiosity leads them there. Maybe reflection leads them there. Maybe they simply begin missing the consistency that once existed. And so they reach out again. But by this time, the emotional landscape is different. The person who once waited anxiously for your messages now reads them calmly. The person who once worried about losing the connection now evaluates it carefully. They no longer ask themselves, "How do I keep this person?" Instead, they ask a new question. Does this connection feel balanced now? That single question changes everything. Because relationships built on imbalance rarely survive once both people become aware of it. And the person who once felt ignored has already learned how to live peacefully without chasing attention. So now, the connection must stand on something stronger. Respect. Consistency. Mutual effort. Without those things, the silence returns. But this time, it does not hurt the same way. Because the heart that once felt ignored has already grown stronger. And strength changes how silence feels. It no longer feels like rejection. It simply feels like clarity. Clarity about who values your presence. Clarity about who notices your effort. Clarity about where your emotional energy truly belongs. And once someone reaches this level of clarity, they rarely return to the version of themselves who waited endlessly for attention. Because they finally understand something simple but powerful. The right people do not make you feel invisible. The right people do not leave you wondering where you stand. The right people show their presence through consistent actions. Through listening. Through responding. Through caring in ways that are obvious, not confusing. And when someone experiences that kind of connection, they never again accept being ignored as normal. Because they now know the difference between someone who values them, and someone who simply enjoys their attention. This realization is what transforms the meaning behind the words. Sorry, you ignored me. Now I will ignore you. Those words are not about punishment. They are about awakening. They represent the moment someone finally understands their own worth. The moment someone stops chasing attention and begins choosing peace. But the story still has one final layer. A truth that many people only realize after everything else has already changed. In the final part, something unexpected will be revealed. A deeper reason why certain people come into our lives, teach us powerful emotional lessons, and then quietly disappear. Once you understand that final truth, the entire story will make sense in a completely new way. Sometimes the most powerful lessons in life are not spoken directly. They arrive quietly, through experiences. Through moments that confuse us, challenge us, and eventually change us. And one of the most profound lessons many people learn in life is this. Not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay. Some people arrive to awaken something inside you. Some arrive to reveal parts of your heart you never noticed before. And some arrive to teach you the value of your own attention. When someone first begins to care about another person deeply, they often give freely. They give their time, their patience, their emotional presence. They listen carefully. They remember small details. They check in even when there is no obvious reason. This kind of care feels natural when it begins. It feels sincere. It feels hopeful. But sometimes that care is not mirrored in the same way. And when effort flows mostly from one side, the connection slowly begins to feel unbalanced. At first the person who cares more may not notice. Or they may notice but choose to ignore the signs. They tell themselves that understanding takes time. That maybe the other person expresses emotions differently. That maybe patience will eventually bring everything into harmony. But as days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months, the imbalance becomes harder to ignore. Messages are answered late. Conversations fade quickly. Moments of connection become rare. And slowly a quiet realization begins forming in the heart. I am giving more than I am receiving. That realization can feel painful. Because admitting it means accepting that something meaningful